What is lean, in case you've been living in a cave and haven't heard about it yet? Lean is basically a philosophy or set of principles for launching successful startups and projects that's based on the ideas of Eric Ries and Steve Blank. And I'm going to give mine in a nutshell of what I think lean represents, the 60-second version, which is to, in essence, offer products and services that customers are willing to pay for. So startups are in search of a repeatable and sustainable business model, and that means validating not only their value proposition, but the type of business, how they're going to enter a market, and their growth hypothesis. And that process involves and is focused on validated learning. So there's a cycle that Eric Ries talks about a lot, the build, measure, learn feedback loop for getting validated learning, where there's a hypothesis, then you make a prediction based on your hypothesis, then you test it ad nauseum. And you start with the quote-unquote MVP, which is your minimally viable product, minimum necessary to basically test your hypothesis as it is at that point, and then you iterate from there. And the goal is resource efficiency in your learning. So how can you move the fastest, the cheapest, with the least effort to learn what you need to learn and get to the next step. And the main focus of lean is actually on business validation by business leads. So that begs the question, where does UX fit in? I'm going to summarize what Eric Ries and Steve Blank have said about this. Eric Ries has exactly one mention of lean UX in his book, and without reading this big, long paragraph, in essence what he's saying is that traditional interaction design has enormously helpful approaches, but because the agencies are in the deliverables business, we end up handing off the deliverable to the client as if that's the end of the learning story. And as he says, no amount of design can anticipate the many complexities of bringing a product to life in the real world. So a new breed of designers is developing new techniques that recognizes that the customer archetype is a hypothesis, not a fact. Now that's all he says. So there's not really much meat there for us UX practitioners. Steve Blank, not quite, he goes into a little more detail, but not necessarily calling it UX. So his first book, The 4 Steps to Epiphany, actually doesn't mention UX at all. And in the Startup Owner's Manual, which came out last month, he's basically teaching what I would call UX basics to entrepreneurs, but without using the term user experience. So he talks about things like get out of the building, which is about observing your customers and watching how they interact in their in the environment in which they might be using your product or service, actually observing their behavior when they do interact with your potential product or service. We might call this ethnography. There's also user research in many forms that he emphasizes, whether it's surveys, interviews, observation, user feedback, testing, metrics, prototypes and wireframing, which he talks about quite a bit, personas and archetypes, and user stories, and scenario-driven development. And we might all look at this and say, yeah, that's what user experience professionals do, except for he's talking about it really to the business and product owners. So that begs the question, where do the UX professionals fit into the picture? And my personal hypothesis is that lean represents UX best practices, but applied to business and product strategy and management. So it's taking our approaches that we take every day as user experience professionals and looking at how can you validate the business using those same tactics and strategies. And my personal company, the reason why we're actually having this panel is because this last year, we do user experience product strategy and UX consulting for our clients. So we are in the deliverables business. We've also been building an in-house product called minidates.com, which is the first real dating service that sends you dates based on when and where you're free. And we're hoping to launch that in the next few months. So we've basically been operating in dual mode as both an in-house tech startup and a UX consulting company. And that is where I discovered Eric Ries's work, and it really brought home the fact that there's a dichotomy here between how we do this work for our clients and what is necessary to be lean from a startup approach and actually validate the business. And there are lots of things that we did right, and there's other things that we didn't do right during this last year, and I'm actually going to talk about that at Agile 2012. But I think it comes back to the same question of where do UX professionals fit into this picture? So the questions for the panelists that they will be discussing is they're going to try and answer the key question, which is what is lean UX? How is it different from Agile? How is it different from traditional UX methods? Is there a specific team or organizational structure needed to support lean? Are there cases when lean UX doesn't make sense? And what's its value? And then they're going to go into detail about how they practice this.